You know, I'm thankful for those who are following along on the daily Bible reading. I've had several talk about it. It's not an easy thing. There's about 25-minute reading, and then if you follow the devotional along, it's a little bit longer than that. But I hope that all of us are benefiting from it. Of course, it's a chronological reading going now through the Old Testament, and we're in the book of Numbers at this time, and it's a struggle as you read that. You know, it seems like there's a lot of whining going on. Children of God were very much adept at that. And in the book of Numbers, you find in chapter 16, there a familiar aspect of a rebellion. There had been so many times in which they had murmured and such, but now in Numbers 16, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, they rebelled against Moses and Aaron. And the phrase that you find in here is they rose up and they said, "You take too much upon you. You see that in the congregation all are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why lift you up above the congregation?" Well, I've looked at that and always read that, and I usually in my mind, I think Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. You know, they're the same thing, and they were involved in it together. But if you read on, you'll find in verses 4 and following, where Moses, of course, spoke against them, chastised them, and he called Dathan and Abiram unto him. After Korah had been confronted, he called others, including Dathan and Abiram. And notice in Numbers 16, verse 13 and 14, he says, "Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us?" And this is Dathan and Abiram speaking. "Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness?" Now, number one, there's that selective memory again. Remember, as you look in the book of Exodus, the people are crying because of the hardship. But now, in their mind, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. You brought us out here in the wilderness to die. And then they say, "Moreover, thou hast not brought us into a land that flowed with milk and honey, or given inheritance of the fields or vineyards." And then they said, "We'll not come up." You see, they look, and in their mind, whenever Moses called them to him, they said, "We're not going to do it. And it's your fault. It's your fault that you got us out of that land. It's your fault that right now we don't have the land that's flowing with milk and honey, the fields, the vineyards that you promised." Kind of a selective memory. You know, whenever I was growing up, there was a little song called "The Name Game." You just change things around to make different names. Well, I think of this as the blame game. You change things around to take a responsibility off of self. Because if you look back in Numbers, the 14th chapter, there was a little incident that happened. God had brought them to the southern confines of the land, sent them in to spy out the land. The children of God went in, the 12 spies went in, and they spied out the land for 40 days. They came back with an evil report. These people were giants. The cities were walled. We were grasshoppers in our own sight. And thus they would not go in. They failed to realize, number one, God did not send them in for approval. He sent them in to spy out the land which He had given them. It was a certainty. And you find that Caleb and Joshua, they said that. But now, whenever Dathan and Abiram stand there, it's all Moses' fault. You're the leader. You're the one who should have brought us into this way, and you didn't do it. You failed. The blame game. You know, Romans, the 15th chapter and verse 4, we find that the things written aforetime are written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. In 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 11, that we don't fall after the same way, the sins they did. But it seems this lesson of blaming is simply just going over the people's heads. How many times do we see in the church, you know, well, why isn't the church growing? God, you should have done this. Or the elders should have done this. Somebody else should have done this. Well, where's the personal responsibility? And it goes over in society. You know, everything in society now is somebody else's fault. It was the way I was treated. It was the place I grew up in. It was what happened hundreds of years ago. Nothing is my fault. You know, I look at this and I pray as I read through this that I realize that, as Paul said in Romans the 2nd chapter, we will give answer for what we have done. I was talking to my wife the other day, and we were discussing this situation exactly. And I said, you know, the world is filled with all sorts of bad things. We cannot control that. But what we can control is how we react to it. We can blame somebody, we can look for excuses, or we can look for a way of escape. God gave them ways of escape in the Old Testament over and over, and they refused. They kept going back to the murmuring, the complaining, the rejection of authority. We can fall into that same thing. The other day, I even read a little book to Charlie's class about Pete loves his shoes. And one of the things in it, and I told the class at the end, you know, Pete got his shoes, they were white shoes he loved, then he stepped in strawberries, they were red, he stepped in blueberries, they were blue, he stepped in mud, they were brown, and then they went back to white as he stepped in water, but he said it's all good. In other words, he went on. He didn't let those things affect him. And I told those little children, I said, you know, you choose what you're going to do with the things that the world throws at you. We do that too. We live in a society in which everybody owes everybody else everything, and everybody else is the blame for anything that's wrong in my life. God says we take responsibility. Joshua told the children of God in Joshua 24, choose ye this day. Most important fact there is we choose. We choose the God we're going to serve. I'm afraid the God of excuses, the God of blame, is a very prominent one. The God of heaven, though, says, you choose to follow me. And if we do that, he tells us it's going to be hard. It's a narrow way. It's a way that's filled with persecution if we live godly. But he says, I'll help you through it. I'll provide a way of escape that whatever comes upon you, you'll be able to bear it. But that only comes to people who don't blame. Instead, they choose. Tonight, each one of us faces a point in our life. You're not a child of God, you choose what you're going to do. If you've gotten to the point in life that you know right and wrong, you're at that accountable time, and you have not obeyed the gospel, you choose tonight whether you're going to. Whenever you're a child of God, a lot of things are going to push you and I aside. And sometimes we'll sin. But we choose, 1 John 1 and verse 9, if we'll confess our sins and realizing he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. But it's our choice. Don't fall into the ways of the world or Israel of old and blame others. Take responsibility for yourself, draw nigh to God, and he'll draw nigh to you.